For years, the disappearance of Malaysian Flight 370 has remained one of the most perplexing mysteries in aviation history. The Netflix documentary attempted to shed light on this enigma, but instead, it fueled more speculation, offering conclusions that lacked concrete evidence. What was presented as truth was, in reality, an illusion of certainty, a carefully crafted narrative that ignored crucial details and alternative theories. The series painted a picture that was gripping, dramatic, and emotionally stirring. But it failed in its fundamental responsibility, to present the facts with clarity. Instead, it leaned on sensationalism, offering a simplistic story that placed blame without sufficient proof. It ignored key aviation principles, dismissed expert opinions, and cherry-picked evidence to fit a predetermined conclusion. The families of the passengers were given a platform, but their emotions were weaponized, used to validate questionable theories instead of guiding an unbiased investigation. In reality, MH370's fate is not a puzzle solved through selective storytelling, but a tragic event that demands forensic precision and analytical depth. The oversimplified theories. One of the most glaring issues with the documentary was its reliance on oversimplified theories that disregarded critical elements of the investigation. Instead of acknowledging the full scope of data available, the series chose to focus on a few hypotheses that made for good television. The idea of pilot Zahari Ahmad Shah deliberately crashing the plane, for instance, was presented as an almost conclusive answer despite the lack of irrefutable proof. The documentary leaned heavily on the argument that he had practiced similar flight paths on a simulator, yet it failed to mention that professional pilots often explore extreme scenarios during simulation exercises without any real-world intent behind them. Moreover, the alternative possibilities, including mechanical failure, electrical malfunctions, or even hijacking, were brushed aside or barely explored. Instead, the documentary relied on the allure of a single digestible answer. By doing so, it misled viewers into believing that the case was nearly solved when, in reality, it remains deeply complex. The lack of physical evidence and the mysterious deviations in the flight path should have opened the door for a broader discussion, but instead, the documentary tightened its grip on speculative conclusions that served its dramatic narrative rather than factual accuracy. The missing voices of experts. One of the most frustrating aspects of the Netflix documentary was its selective use of expert opinions. Aviation specialists who had spent years studying MH370's disappearance were largely ignored in favor of voices that supported the documentary's favored theories. This approach created an echo chamber, where dissenting perspectives were conveniently left out, preventing a balanced discussion of what might have happened. Many aviation experts have long questioned the evidence supporting the theory that the pilot deliberately crashed the plane. Some have pointed out that no suicide note was ever found, and that the flight path, while unusual, did not necessarily indicate a calculated act of destruction. Others have highlighted the possibility that MH370 suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure that incapacitated the crew, leading to the erratic flight pattern and eventual crash. However, these voices were absent or significantly downplayed in the documentary, reinforcing a narrative that was more about compelling television than responsible journalism. Furthermore, the role of satellite data, which played a crucial role in narrowing down the search areas, was underexplored. Instead of breaking down how investigators used this information to trace the plane's likely final location, the documentary seemed to cast doubt on these findings without providing a reasonable counter-argument. This omission left viewers with an incomplete understanding of the scientific methodologies involved in the investigation, and instead fed into the conspiracy-laden atmosphere that surrounded the series. The damage of misinformation. Perhaps the greatest flaw of the documentary was its contribution to misinformation. By presenting a biased and incomplete version of events, it misled millions of viewers into believing in an inaccurate representation of MH370's disappearance. In an era where conspiracy theories spread rapidly, such an approach is not just irresponsible, it is dangerous. For the families of the victims, the documentary reignited old wounds, forcing them to relive their grief through a lens of speculation rather than truth. The focus on dramatic storytelling over investigative integrity did a disservice to those still seeking closure. Instead of bringing clarity, it added more noise to an already convoluted case. It gave rise to new waves of internet theories, where speculation was treated as fact and uncertainty was exploited for entertainment. In the end, the Netflix documentary on Malaysian Flight 370 served as a reminder of how media can shape public perception, for better or worse. Instead of educating viewers with well-researched, balanced journalism, it chose the path of sensationalism, leaving behind a distorted version of one of aviation's greatest mysteries. What the documentary got wrong was not just the details, it was the very essence of what responsible storytelling should be. The Netflix documentary on Malaysian Flight 370 set out to answer questions, but instead created more confusion. It presented a polished narrative that seemed definitive, yet when one looks closer, the cracks in its foundation become evident. The documentary was built not on a pursuit of truth, but on a thirst for viewership, a spectacle wrapped in the guise of investigative journalism. In doing so, it did more harm than good, leading the public away from facts and deeper into a web of speculation and doubt. The approach taken by the filmmakers was clear: push the most sensational theories, dismiss the inconvenient facts, and keep the audience hooked with half-truths. There was an evident prioritization of drama over accuracy, with a focus on making the story compelling rather than ensuring it was grounded in truth. The story of MH370 is tragic and deeply complex, yet the documentary turned it into a piece of entertainment. Rather than treating it with the respect and integrity it deserved, families were left with more unanswered questions. Aviation experts were frustrated by the lack of rigorous research, and the general audience was fed a version of events that lacked credibility. Ignoring alternative possibilities, one of the biggest flaws in the documentary was its outright dismissal of key alternative possibilities. The filmmakers seemed intent on pushing a single narrative: that the pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah, deliberately crashed the plane. While this theory is indeed one of the more commonly debated possibilities, it is by no means the only credible explanation. Yet the documentary treated it as if it was the only reasonable conclusion, ignoring other vital possibilities that needed equal consideration. For instance, the idea of a mechanical failure was almost entirely neglected. In aviation history, there have been multiple cases of cockpit smoke, rapid depressurization, and catastrophic system malfunctions leading to erratic flight paths and crashes. MH370's transponder was disabled, and communication ceased suddenly. Details that could indicate an onboard fire or electrical failure, rather than a deliberate act by the pilot. Moreover, debris analysis suggested that the aircraft could have experienced a high-speed impact with water, which is inconsistent with a controlled suicide dive. These contradictions were largely glossed over in favor of a neater, more dramatic story. Another possibility that the documentary largely ignored was the theory of a hijacking. While some reports briefly entertained this notion, they failed to deeply investigate potential motives, threats, or external factors that could have contributed to such an event. The world was quick to speculate, but the documentary did little to explore whether this was a scenario worth serious consideration. Instead, it opted for the more cinematic version of events, one that focused on a single individual rather than a broader network of possibilities, manipulating the audience. Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the documentary was how it manipulated its audience into believing it was providing concrete answers. It used cinematic techniques, dramatic music, slow-motion sequences, and emotional interviews to shape a perception rather than presenting raw facts for the audience to analyze. Independently, this method was effective in creating engagement, but at the cost of misrepresenting the reality of the situation. Many experts in the field of aviation have stressed the importance of keeping an open mind regarding MH370's disappearance. However, The documentary sought to close the discussion rather than expand it. It left little room for doubt, presenting its claims as near certainties, despite the lack of conclusive evidence. Viewers who were not well versed in aviation complexities were led to believe that the mystery had been solved, when, in reality, it remains one of the most perplexing cases in modern history. Furthermore, the documentary frequently used emotionally charged interviews with grieving families to support its theories. While their pain is real and their voices deserve to be heard, their suffering was used as a tool to bolster speculative claims rather than to drive an unbiased discussion. Instead of allowing the audience to form their own conclusions, the filmmakers curated the emotional responses to steer them toward believing the story they wanted to tell. The real impact of false conclusions, the repercussions of the Netflix documentary's approach, extend far beyond entertainment. It influenced public perception in a way that was irresponsible, leading to a renewed wave of misinformation and speculation across social media. This had real-world consequences, not just for the families of the victims, but also for ongoing investigations and search efforts. Since the plane disappeared, search efforts have relied on a combination of satellite data, oceanic drift analysis, and aviation expertise. When the documentary cast doubt on the reliability of these methods, it did more than just create suspense. It undermined years of painstaking research conducted by experts across multiple disciplines. Public trust in aviation authorities and investigators was shaken, all because the documentary chose storytelling over accuracy. Moreover, the families of those on board were once again forced to endure the pain of reliving the tragedy, this time through the lens of misleading narratives. Rather than finding solace in an accurate portrayal of events, they were left to contend with new waves of misinformation, online speculation, and media sensationalism. Instead of bringing them closer to closure, the documentary drove them further into uncertainty. The Disappearance of MH370 is a story that deserves responsible storytelling, one rooted in facts, scientific integrity, and genuine investigative effort. What the Netflix documentary got wrong was not just the details, but the very foundation of ethical reporting. Instead of seeking truth, it sought entertainment. Instead of offering clarity, it offered confusion. And instead of honoring the victims, it turned their tragedy into spectacle.